So we're probably going to be running about 15 minutes behind, but we'll see how things go, or 10 minutes maybe. Our next presentation is a scale-up project from, I think it was last year, if I remember correctly. And so this one is actually the product of two scale-up projects that we actually merged together, but we're going to be concentrating on one of them, and it's the partnership with Daybreak Family Child Services. I'm probably not saying it right. Or Child Family Services? Nope. Family and Child. Child. Let me read it. It's not there. Daybreak. Parent Child Services Center. Okay, I'm not going to get it right. So I'm going to let Heather Bartlett, the executive director, come up and do that. We also have Claire Riggs, and Jenny Brace is not here, unfortunately, but she contributed to the presentation. And yeah, just a really important topic, I believe. So I will ask you to come and speak. Thank you.
All right, so when we first started this presentation, I think it was fall semester of 2018. So it was kind of right when cannabis was coming into legalization. I think it actually became legalized in the middle of our project. So it was a pretty hot topic. Me and Jenny were actually in different groups. I had partnered with the Pottle Center, whereas Jenny's group had partnered with Daybreak. And it was just interesting that both the community partners wanted to look into cannabis, so it just really made us realize how big of a topic it is. Another thing I'll say is that so a lot of our information here is from like government websites and maybe from health professionals who could be biased. You know, a lot of times they do have an agenda. So I have like some basic information, but once again, like cannabis hasn't been legalized for that long, so just gonna need a little bit of more time before like some further research comes out, and that's also something that we're trying to look into now, so I'll touch on that later in the presentation. So during the interview with Heather Bartlett, so we discussed 3 topics of cannabis legalization. So that can be on its impact to families. And so from this conversation, we drew on 3 main topics. So that would be the effects of cannabis on prenatal development, the impacts of cannabis on parenting, and how cannabis use is perceived by society in relation to a harm reduction approach. So what is cannabis? So cannabis is also known as marijuana, weed, or pot, and it has more than 700 chemical compounds. So there can be indica, sativa, or hybrids. There's CBD versus THC, with THC kind of having more of like the relaxing effects, and CBD used a lot of times for pain management and things like that. And then there's also there can be many different levels of potency, so a lot of people can react to things differently. So we just touch on a little more, like the difference between THC and CBD. So THC is kind of, like I said, more responsible for the relaxation, how the brain reacts to things. This can kind of be like the high people feel or the intoxication. It can have both therapeutic and harmful effects. A lot of people react to things differently, so it can depend on the person. And the potency has increased from an average of 3% in the 80s to 15% today, and that's from the Government of Canada website. CBD it doesn't usually produce a higher intoxication. Like I said, a lot of times it's used for pain management. A lot of people have been using that, especially now that it's legalized. There has been some evidence that CBD may block or lower the THC levels. So like I said, I guess there's different streams and people can react to things differently. And here's just kind of a difference. There's sativa and indica. And they just kind of look different, but all under cannabis. So how is cannabis used? So cannabis can be used in a lot of different ways. A lot of times people use it for its effects on the mind, but it can be also used for medical or social purposes, and it can be taken in many different ways. So you can smoke it, there's pipes or bongs, or blunts. And then you can drink it or eat it, so it can be in teas, sodas, candy, baked goods, as well as vaping. So there are some general health risks. So using cannabis on a daily basis, or a lot of studies have shown like really frequent users, can increase an individual's risk of developing a mental health problem, worsen a current or past mental health problem, or even induce psychosis. That being said, a lot of people also use it to treat mental health issues. It really all depends. Physical withdrawal symptoms may include excessive sweating, decreased appetite, and other flu-like symptoms. Psychological withdrawal symptoms can include depression, nervousness, or feeling like the pain that was being treated by the use of cannabis is overwhelming. It can also affect your memory and can cause memory difficulties. So there are some short-term and long-term effects. So short-term effects can include relaxation, heightened sensory experiences, confusion, fatigue, impaired ability to pay attention or react quickly, panic, fear, or anxiety, damage to blood vessels, decreased blood pressure, and increased heart rate or delusions or hallucinations. With long-term effects, this usually only comes from like very frequent use. It's also an increased risk if you're still like have a developing brain. That would be increased risk of addiction. It is still very, very rare to become addicted. Harm to memory, concentration, and ability to make decisions, and smoking it can cause lung infections or bronchitis. So like I said, the frequency and intensity of use does make a difference on how cannabis can affect your body. So frequent or intensive patterns of use increase the likelihood of developing multiple health problems. So that can be changes in brain development or functioning, mental health issues, cannabis dependence, or suicidality. Overall, frequency and intensity are among the strongest and most consistent predictors of severe and or long-term cannabis-related health problems. So a lot of more recent studies are starting to show some benefits to cannabis. So like I said here, back in 1995, there was an even bigger stigma surrounding cannabis, where it was kind of viewed in a very negative perspective, and anyone who took it was just considered to have a psychological issue. It was a huge stigma, not good. And but now the popularity has increased a lot in societies all around the world. And it's become a tool for medication. A lot of people may use it to self-medicate. If they're taking other medications, sometimes it can help combat those side effects. And now use in all 10 provinces of Canada, and the declining negative stigma associated with cannabis. So gathering cannabis use measurement, like it can be more attainable to actually figure out more benefits, because a lot of research right now is mostly focused on the negative impacts. But with legalization, we're hoping to start looking into more benefits. So like I said before, although cannabis can impact your mental health negatively, it can also be a positive thing. Some people use cannabis to relieve the symptoms of their condition, or if they're on like a certain medication that has some bad side effects, they can relieve those symptoms as well. And evidence shows that the potential to both increase and decrease the effects of anxiety. So some researchers believe that those conflicting effects may be due to the different levels of potency. So bodies are different, potency is different, so how you react is just going to be different. And here's some scientific evidence for the therapeutic benefits of cannabis for the following conditions. So for antispasm or multiple sclerosis, for anticonvulsive or epilepsy, for anti-nausea for people who may be on chemotherapy, and an appetite stimulant for those experiencing extreme weight loss. And recent research has showed that it can be really good for managing pain. So, like I said before, in 1995, it was, in 1995, around that time, it was really negative. There was way more of a stigma than there is today. Whereas today, cannabis has gained more of a societal acceptance. A lot of professionals, there's some hockey players, Olympians, lots of people come up and say that they use cannabis or that cannabis has been very beneficial for them. So just getting that out there in the media has been helpful for reducing that stigma. So there are still some myths and fears surrounding cannabis. A lot of that is because research right now, there's still not a lot of it. It hasn't been legalized really anywhere in North America for all that long. Like even in the US, those states, it hasn't been a whole lot of time, not for some significant research. So a lot of people may think it's safe to drive while high. That's not true. So cannabis affects you differently than alcohol, but it still impairs your judgment and reaction time. Legalization means that everyone will start to use cannabis. That's definitely not true. Legalization may increase, have some people use it, but overall it's not really going to have a major impact on people who aren't using or anything like that. And a lot of people may think that there's absolutely no health risks at all because it's a plant, it's supernatural. That's not true. It can still affect your lungs and throat if you're smoking it. It can also have effects on your memory. If you are using it frequently on a more developing brain, it can impact your memory and things like that as well. So a lot of people may think that cannabis is a gateway drug. Once you start using cannabis, you're just gonna start using everything else. That's not true. A lot of people use cannabis just as a form of medicating. A lot of people who use it just to get the high aren't gonna use other drugs. It's just not true. Cannabis causes brain damage. So cannabis can have more of an impact on younger developing brains, but overall it's not gonna impact your brain that much if you're not using it super frequently. And cannabis leads to addiction. So some people may become dependent on the drug, but overall it's not really gonna lead to addiction. So the effects of cannabis on prenatal development. So right now there really is a lack of research on the effects of cannabis use on utero or fetal development in Canada, as well as other countries around the world. So there's no real finding on how much is okay to use if you're a mom, if you're pregnant. But findings are difficult to interpret due to methodological issues. Hoping that now that it's been legalized a little longer, some more research is coming out. A book published in Toronto titled Risks of Cannabis on Fertility, Pregnancy, Breastfeeding, and Parenting states that there is no known safe amount of cannabis use in pregnancy or while breastfeeding. So this research is presented from the past 3 to 5 years, but hoping that more concrete research will come out soon. So cannabis use may impact the quality and count of a man's sperm and a woman's menstrual cycle and their ability to get pregnant. So there's, like I said, no known safe amount to use currently. Most healthcare providers will recommend not treating pain or feelings of anxiety while caring for a young child or while pregnant. They suggest avoiding any exposure to cannabis, including secondhand smoke, which may have an impact on the woman's health and ability to conceive. Once again, those are from the government website, so they may be biased research. It's still hard to tell right now. So this research is from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and Committee on Obstetric Practice on Cannabis. So heavy cannabis use was associated with adverse consequences. So compared to non-users, women who use cannabis at least weekly had a higher risk of low birth weight, and with newborns at 6.7 versus 11.2, and preterm birth at less than 37 weeks with 5.7 versus 10.4. And newborns had a higher risk of lower alertness and birth weight, and a higher chance of developing cognitive impairment. So some other research can support these findings, suggesting children exposed to prenatal cannabis use have difficulty learning, poorer school performance, sleep problems, impulsiveness, symptoms of depression and anxiety, and poorer memory. Once again, this research still isn't completely concrete. There could be many other factors contributing to that, so it's important to have studies that just follow proper methods and take time. That can take a lot of time because cannabis really hasn't been legal for that long. There is a risk of cannabis use while breastfeeding. So cannabis stores and passes through a mother's breast milk. Research indicates cannabis can stay in a baby's system, and with the duration of which is still unclear. So parenting and cannabis. So currently research shows that there is no direct correlation between cannabis use and physical or supervisory neglect. However, where neglect and cannabis exist simultaneously, social and economical issues are identified as the underlying cause. So there are, however, correlation between frequent cannabis use and physical abuse. There is also correlation between physical abuse and higher levels of impulsivity. So it's often claimed that the calming effects makes parenting easier, and they may help them get less escalated. Right now, there's a lot of fears about parents under the influence of cannabis having a short attention span, limited memory, and slow response to dangerous situations. These symptoms may lead to inadequate care of child. Right now, with child service involvement, there's really no clear guidelines. So their research, or what they have right now, still isn't super clear, and this can lead to a stigma and really impact the parent who is using cannabis, because there's no clear guidelines and no real way to know how to do things right now. And so effects on the children. So parental cannabis use can have an effect on children. Any history of cannabis use in parents is correlated to adolescent cannabis use at any frequency. It is important to set clear rules and limitations surrounding cannabis, especially with legalization. Children are more likely to partake in cannabis use if they have easy access, parents as role models, vulnerability, and parenting practices. Authoritative and indulgent parenting styles related to lower levels of adolescent cannabis use. So authoritative is kind of having clear boundaries, setting limits, discipline, and teaching independence, whereas indulgent is kind of more no limitations and kind of playing more of a friend role than a parent. So harm reduction. So right now, for harm reduction, and if you're working with parents who may be involved with child services, who are also users of cannabis, education on different types and strains and what it does can be helpful. Self-awareness, so kind of if they can understand, like, why am I using cannabis? When should I use cannabis? Things like that. Self-regulation, so how much is enough? Maybe you need it at the end of a really long day, when your kid's already in bed. Maybe you need it at other times. It really all depends, like how much is enough and what is your limit. Healthy coping strategies to alleviate dependency. So, if they are depending on cannabis right now, that's okay, but maybe they want to try doing something else too, like whatever fits them best. And getting cannabis from a legal source. So just making sure that your cannabis is safe, that it's not, there's nothing else in it, and you know exactly what you're taking. So So, like I said before, a conversation regarding safer ways to smoke can help lower risks associated with cannabis. So, tips for safer cannabis use can be avoid smoking cannabis with tobacco, avoid deep inhalation or breath holding. If smoking cannabis use joints rather than water bongs, use plastic piece rolled unbleached cardboard as a filter to prevent burns. And once again, purchase from a legal source. Make sure you know what you're smoking. So if you're working with service users who use cannabis, just acknowledge why they're using it. Acknowledge that there's both pros and cons. If cannabis is used as a coping mechanism, discuss other healthy coping mechanisms. When discussing cannabis, ensure that it is more of a conversation and not a lecture. Make sure that you're open-minded. Right now research is still really unclear about how much is safe to use when parenting, so, it's okay. Don't be judgmental. And ask questions and avoid making judgments. Understand that you cannot stop the service user from making their own decision. It's all their choice. All you can do is just provide everything that you know, all the education, all the research that we have right now, and speak openly. So it's all their decision. Just make sure that you're having an open conversation. So, like I said before, just learn why they may be using cannabis. Is it a way to self-medicate? Is it to relieve pain? There's just so many reasons. Is it just for the high after a long day? All reasons are okay. So it's just understand why they may want to use it. It can also be helpful to find out how often they use cannabis. So frequency right now, a lot of the research is showing that frequency is what makes a difference. If they're only using it like once a week, it's probably not going to have a major impact. But sustained drug use is common among people who feel isolated or marginalized. So maybe they are feeling isolated or marginalized, and then that's a whole other thing that you can talk with them about. People with few connections or meaningful relationships in their life frequently use cannabis as a way to seek solace. So, like I said, that can just be a whole other conversation to explore. An increase in activity is a natural way to boost adrenaline levels, or activities that relieve feelings of anxiety can help decrease use of cannabis. So if that's something that they're into, once again, people make their own decisions, but if that is something that they're into, then you can suggest doing other activities that may help them relax. And now there's a section on stigma with Heather Bartlett, and she's just going to talk about how some of the people that she works with may be impacted by stigma right now.
Hi, thanks and welcome. I'm the executive director of Daybreak Parent Child Center. We've been around since 1972, so we've been working with parents and children for a very long time. Myself, I've been at Daybreak for 20 years. So for me, as was introduced earlier, it became a topic of interest. It actually started at our board table. So Daybreak is run by a policy governance model for our board, so without getting too complicated into that, we're very interested in looking at our moral owners and looking at the things that are impacting children and families in our community. So again, with the legalization of marijuana, as was also stated, it's become a very popular topic. People are wondering what we should be saying. So right off the bat, there's been all kinds of guidelines come out for employers. So I attended a workplace and safety conference just after legalization, and practically the entire day was taken up with explanations of marijuana and the harms and the risks to employers and employees. So I think we're all talking about it in different ways. So when it came up for a topic to work with the social work students, it just kind of floated, because I've been engaged with social work students in my role as executive director for many years, and I often complain to the School of Social Work that students come and want me to pick a topic. So I've always found that quite challenging. So these students, I think, kind of got lucky because it was so right out there that it became very easy to talk about. So, and I think that's kind of where we're at. So we've gone from nobody talking about marijuana, everybody afraid to talk about it for years and years and years, and now everybody's talking about it, right? So it's kind of like, how do we get to the middle such that we're not gone from, I remember my own father who's passed away now. My husband asked him one time, because he was a drinker, right? So if he was alive now, he'd be 80. But so dad was a drinker. So my husband asked him one time. He said, "Well, how come you never ever tried pot?" And my dad said, "I was afraid I'd like it." So he just saw it as another addiction. So somebody who grew up, like I say, in the 60s and the 70s, if you didn't grow up in the culture of the hippies and everything was okay, I found that there's a generational, it's the dirty old marijuana, right? And a lot of my own colleagues and friends now who have aging parents and are, so my generation is now looking to their parents and saying, "Geez, Mom, why don't you try some marijuana to help you with your pain?" And the response from most, again, 60, 70-year-olds are, "That dirty old marijuana, I'm not going to get caught now smoking that out by the door." And we'll say, no, there's lots of options. It comes. So again, everybody's talking about it. Just because it's legalized, it's giving people mixed messages. So a lot of our young families are going, well, it's only pot. Now it's legal. So because it's legal, then the stigma should automatically change. But some stigma for moms and dads, especially young moms and dads, are, number one, where are you getting the money to buy that? So if you're living in poverty and you've got a child and you're on social assistance, where are you even getting the money to buy that, right? So all the things that were brought up, they're still happening. So for us, it's that, how do we help people weigh out that mixed message? The fact that some parents think that they're better parents. Again, I think if there's anybody in the room who's ever parented high, I guess you'd have your own statement on that. I find it really comes down to your own experiences. Again, that generation of, oh, the dirty old weed, now it's, oh my God, it's legal. I've been fortunate in my life that I've been able to travel a lot of places, and my most recent vacation was, as soon as you're Canadian, it's like, oh, they got legalized pot in Canada now. What do you think of that? So then it becomes that, okay, so is it making it better? Maybe for our marginalized moms. Maybe the fact that you're legitimately getting it somewhere in a store where you can, I've never bought pot at Tweed, so maybe someone else could answer that question, but I'm led to believe that you're going to get a little bit of information when you walk in, that the people who are selling it to you are going to ask you or try to find out what it is that and why it is that you're seeking marijuana. I mean, when I first started at Daybreak, if a child protection worker found out that you were smoking marijuana, well, then that was a big deal. And then when the opiate crisis moved into our city, marijuana was looked at, well, we don't even look at marijuana anymore. So no one's ever getting pee tests for marijuana in child protection as long as I know. But opiates certainly changed everything. So now, again, we're at a space where we've got moms. We have a healthy baby club in Daybreak. We've had a healthy baby club since the 80s. We started healthy baby clubs in Newfoundland and Labrador. So now it's what education do we need now to provide to our pregnant teens who oftentimes, again, we do specialize in working with pregnant moms who are at high risk. So some of them are coming in already addicted. They could be, lots of the moms that we're meeting the last several years are on a methadone program. Another interest of mine is the impact of methadone. Again, just like marijuana research is not out there in prenatal exposure and what to anticipate, I think we're going to see those two kind of coming together, I hope, in research in terms of, is methadone, I would hope, again, not a researcher, but I'm pretty confident saying that a methadone is probably less risky to the unborn fetus than an opiate. But again, now we're at what is, like we were saying, what is an appropriate, is there an appropriate amount? For me, would I rather a mom smoke or whatever method you're going to use to use the marijuana. I still think that there's probably some less risks there than intravenous drug use. I mean, these are probably some pretty obvious observations, but we've come to that pact where Daybreak, we're very much, it's kind of like we're our own little family. Sometimes you come into our parent kitchen in our building and moms come to the table, and we provide a non-judgmental environment that allows moms to talk about anything. So now it's like I said earlier, we've gone from not talking about it to every single time we're at the kitchen table at work now, somebody's talking about it. So the staff are looking to me, we're looking to websites, we're looking to social work students, and we're excited about participating in something that we can educate, because our greatest goal at Daybreak is to have children who are developmentally thriving. So what is the impairment? I remember when I was doing my social work degree myself, and we were talking, especially 20 years ago, look at FASD as another example. And I remember being educated about FASD, and my mom telling me that, oh, sure, when I was pregnant at you and New Year's Eve, I had a couple of drinks. I was like, oh my God, Mom, right? So we've gone from I'm in my 50s. So in the 60s, my mother thought that was socially appropriate to have a couple of drinks. I remember I had a girlfriend whose mother was from Ireland, and when I was pregnant and being nauseous, her mother would say, oh, sure, everybody in Ireland drinks a pint of beer a day. So now we've gotten to a point in our society where in Ontario, anyways, you go into a bar and you're liable to see a poster up that says the dangers of drinking and pregnancy. So is that where we're going to go with marijuana? I don't know. Again, it's food for thought and a very interesting topic. So thanks for collaborating with us. And that's, I guess, my thoughts, unless anybody had any. Is that the end of your presentation?
Pretty much just one more slide, just saying kind of the main theme throughout this whole presentation was that it was only very recently legalized. There's still not a whole lot of research. So there's really just a need for more observational studies. So we've applied through a grant with CRISM in an effort to understand the context of Bill C-45 and the risks and realities associated with the problematic cannabis use in women, and how community organizations like Daybreak, Parent-Child Center, and other social service organizations can provide services that fit within more of a harm reduction framework. And yeah, that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
I'd just like to say a couple of things. I'm faculty at the School of Social Work, and like everyone here, we were all in a room when legalization happened, so to speak, right? I usually eat my lunch with the staff, the administrative staff in the room, and the subject was, oh my God, what's going to happen with the marijuana use in the university? And I told them, you're not going to notice any difference. That's one thing. The second thing, you mentioned gateway drug. The best line I've ever heard is from the actor Zach Galifianakis, the guy with the big beard and Hangover, that guy. He said, gateway to what? Rich? This reference to sports. You remember the Olympic Games when the Canadian young guy, smoked marijuana and locked in and just went down that slope and won a gold medal? Yes. Lots of acquaintances who drive when they're under the influence, and they say the same thing. You lock in. Everything becomes super clear. At our school, our dean, after it became legalized, our dean arranged for a webinar with an expert from somewhere in Canada. So the dean was there, our administrative officer was there, the executive assistant was there, and one faculty member, me. And the guy was on, he was talking about alcohol and dangers, and you know, you got to be careful with alcohol. And this is all basically, he talked about marijuana was really not an issue for him, so that was the extent of it. I've worked a lot with people with HIV/AIDS across Canada, and many of them have legalized prescriptions, not legalized, what's it called? Medical prescription, yeah. And they swear by it. It's helpful. My own brother had difficulty with his knees, and he's recently been prescribed. Now, this is someone who would never imagine marijuana. That's too dangerous. You know nothing about it, but he's taken something that helps with pain in his knees. Clearly, we can learn from the medical side of the research that's been done from legalized or the medicalized marijuana. And clearly, as you state, more research needs to be done. But this is great.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's been legalized for a lot longer than when we initially started this project now. And I'd say in people who just regularly were using it, there's not a whole lot of change. But I think that what legalization will bring is just more opportunities for research. Right now, all the research is very medical, and it's all pretty biased towards kind of a negative perspective. So just having the legalization and being able to do further research, I think just can make an impact on how we can use it for harm reduction and things like that. Yep.
So locally here in, I believe it's actually in Mount Pearl, there's marijuana for trauma. They have an office out that way, and there's a physician associated with that. And it's basically an outfit for people who have PTSD or maybe some other diagnosis. The thing about it is that when it became legal, it also meant that it became more warehouse production. And that changed the potency of it perhaps tenfold. So if you were getting it from somebody who grew it in their closet, it was probably not as potent as somebody who was growing it in a factory. And the thing when it comes to parents who might avail of cannabis is that the difference between the sativa blend, which is more of a productive, would give you the hyperfocus, it's more of a stimulant, where the indica is more of a suppressant and more of a downer. So that's meant to do the relaxational thing. Either one of those can have either a high CBD count or a high THC count or a blend of both different plants, but also both CBD and THC. So if mom wakes up in the morning and she struggles to be productive in the morning, a time that's going to be really important for her child, then something that has a high CBD level of sativa with maybe a low THC count for indica would actually balance what she needs to do to be able to be productive and attentive to her child, while still having some low kind of influence on any kind of anxiety. And until people start to understand the difference between the sativa and the indica, the CBD and the THC, but also the blend, then you'd have better understanding to know that, you know, in the nighttime, the switch would be actually a higher THC count and probably the indica, with probably little to no sativa because you don't want to be stimulated if you're trying to use it for sleep. Or it might be a pretty even blend if you're using it for pain or the only CBD. So if you're somebody who's driving, let's say, and you were on CBD oil, it's a sativa blend, then you're not likely to be high. Are you impaired? Your function actually might be enhanced. That to me is still impaired, but it's an enhancement. And I guess that's the whole thing when it comes to any of the Olympic stuff. But there's definitely a bunch of research out there too that kind of counterbalances the banter of, you know, oh, it's a gateway drug and it's going to lead to X, Y, and Z. Because I noticed that in the presentation you had mentioned something about the correlation between physical violence and impulsivity. But I also noticed that the research for that was 2015, which was before it was legalized. And I would be really interested to know that that was stigma days. Those were very pre and kind of really geared towards stigma. versus there's other research that I've heard where it's not even comparable to, per se, the effects of alcohol, or that it was nowhere near as devastating as some of the other drugs that you substitute. I know for a lot of tradespeople that they actually were moved on to some more heavier narcotics, such as cocaine, because of the urine factor. When they were tested, it shows up for 30 days versus other stuff, but not so many. So it was interesting how some of those lines of stigma actually would push people to use other narcotics. But that too, that it's an impressive study to go after, based on the fact that the service user would be very aware of what effects that they're experiencing and why they would seek to have that aid in the first place. So,
I think that's a really interesting perspective. My comment would be that just talking about thinking about daybreak moms and the moms that I'm working with, I don't know if they'd have that higher level of thought that you have. I'm not sure that moms living in poverty who insecure housing, wondering, insecure food, are they monitoring what they're smoking and what the impact of this bag of pot was versus this one? Maybe they are. Again, that's a changing thing. If you're still buying pot off Buddy down the road, you still don't know what you're buying. If you're buying pot in the Tweed, you got a chance of knowing. And I say this, I should bring my husband to things like this, because my husband is I would call him a very knowledgeable pot smoker. And his comments around the marijuana being sold in the dispensaries are that they're not original. The word has gone out of my mind. It's not an original strain of marijuana. That his knowledge tells him that, the introduction, there are so many strains, and so when he's ordering his pot off the internet, because he doesn't go to Tweed because he says it's too expensive and we're all getting ripped off. So he orders his from the internet, and the first thing he does is looks at what's available, and then he researches the strain. So do I think our moms who are dealing with crying babies and kids and all that, taking the time to research the strains and whether it's maybe they are, but I somehow doubt it. That's where I think, like I say, what you're saying, if we could get parents or young people even thinking from that perspective, wouldn't that be a goal? Because right now it's like, wow, it's legal, I can go in. How much, this is my vision, of course, is that people are going in and saying, what can I get the best stone? I don't know, or what?
GPs are also assessing, because PTSD is probably high prevalence rate amongst single parent mothers. So, I would question too, what's the stigma around that cohort, and then not, for example, being given a requisition to go see somebody at marijuana for trauma, or something that is at least medically linked to having a specific GP doctor for that use of that drug, right?
Sure.
I would consider that there's actually very little to no correlation between who would be suggested to go to a place like that versus Tweed or to the street.
Well, for me, again, if moms are buying pot on the street, I still think that that's a safer avenue than buying pharmaceuticals. That's my own personal opinion, that pot is not, hopefully, unless it's laced with something, I guess, pot is not going to kill you. You're not going to get violently horrific, and I don't think there's many correlations between, everybody jokes about potheads and how, lazy and stuff they are, so I don't think there's too many, bar fights downtown amongst potheads, right?
Thank you very much.